If your new patients stop tomorrow, most chiropractors, I think, would probably panic. And you do one of three things. You'd either go out and you start running ads, you'd start posting more, or you would chase people even harder. And I'm here to tell you that I would do the exact opposite. I'm here to tell you that I don't think you have a new patient problem. What I actually think you have is a retention problem. And most of the chiropractors that I sit and have consultation calls with, or chiros that I coach myself, have a problem that they don't ever see. And it's actually all based on retention. And until you fix the back door of your practice and you stop the leak of patients, no amount of marketing is going to fix or save your practice. So the very first thing I would do is I would focus on fixing my PVA. Now PVA, as you may or may not know, stands for patient visit average. And if you don't know how to calculate this, let me give you the most simple way that I know to do it. That'll give you a rough estimate of how many times someone is coming into your practice to see you. So you take your total number of visits that you've seen in a year and you divide that number by your number of new patients who came through your practice that year. So that's going to give you a rough idea of how many visits someone is staying with you throughout their course of care. So my question for you before we go any further is stop and figure this out. Is it 8? Is it 10? Is it 12? Is a number higher than that? And ideally, a really strong practice is going to have a higher PVA than a lower PVA because it creates predictable revenue and it prevents you from having to chase new people into the future. So then the question becomes, if your PVA is 12, or like ours was at one time, it was 22. And we started asking the question, what is happening at visit 22 or whatever your number is that's causing people to leave? Because here's the thing, people don't just randomly drop off. It's very predictable. And if you start to look at your number, I guarantee that you'll notice a pattern just like we did. I'm going to use one of the clients that I have coached in the past to give you kind of an example of where they were at. So we sat down, we're doing a conversation. We're talking about this exact concept of PVA. And so I asked them in the spot, I'm like, hey, go calculate it and see what your PVA actually is. And when he came back with the number, he was shocked to see that the number wasn't actually in the 20s, it was actually 12. So here's what that means. If the average person was staying with him for 12 visits inside of his practice, and he was charging $50 per visit, then that would be a lifetime value at $600. So that's about the average amount that someone's going to spend with him over the course of their practice. Here's the coolest part. As I'm working with this client, we got their PVA up to the number of 20 that he thought it was before calculating it, which is why I would encourage you to go do that now before you continue the rest of this video and then come back. And when you do, here's what you're gonna see is that when we increased his PVA from 12 to 20, and this took some work to do, and I'll explain exactly how to do it in the other parts of this video, here's what you see is that the lifetime value for a patient went from $600 in a month to $1,000 in a month, which is super cool. But that may not sound like a lot. You're like, that's just a $400 difference. It can't be that big of a deal. If he only had 50 new patients in a year, which I pray that your practice is getting many, many more than that, the coolest part of this is that his revenue would grow by over $20,000 without changing anything. So that's not adding any marketing. That's not adding any outbound conversations. That's not adding the time that it takes to do new client exam and start someone. And when you start to use and implement some of these strategies, you can get the number up even higher than 20. So it's so critical if you're really looking to create a lasting legacy for your family. Yes, of course, make more money, but serve more people and serve them more deeply. And then be the go-to provider that people trust and love and look up to and become the authority. It actually comes down to looking at your PVA and making sure you know what that number is and then identifying predictably where that spot is that people drop off so that you can have a strategy around ensuring that people continue beyond that point. All right, so check this out. Now that we have looked at PVA, we got to move into client experience. And this is my favorite part of the conversation. How do we create an environment that people don't want to leave? How much have you focused on the experience that your client has inside of your practice? Because here's the reality. Most places that we go are just plainly average. Even the places that are hyped up, sometimes the vibe is good, but the food's terrible. Sometimes the food is great, but the service is terrible. And the same question I would ask you in your practice is, what is the vibe like? What is your presence like? Very few places that we go to actually make you think, I want to go back there. And this is the standard that we tried to set in our practice, is to make it a place that is undeniably different than anywhere else anybody has ever been, so that people say, undoubtedly, I have to go back there. I love being there. At our office, Here's what we focus on: celebrating wins, revisiting goals, and building community. Because here's what usually happens in practice. People come in with an issue. Of course, they start to get better because we know chiropractic care works. Their baseline improves. And then the most frustrating part is they forget where they started. And because they're feeling so good, they decide to stop and discontinue care because they think that they're all better. And I hear it all the time from people who say, you have the hardest job, because people start functioning so well that they forget that they ever felt bad in the first place. And this brings us nicely into part number 3, which is you have to reframe the care. All right, look, if you're anything like me, you don't get adjusted because you're in pain. You get adjusted because you want to function at 100%. And we as chiropractors get that. But one of two things happens. Either patients we take care of don't get it, or they're never told that in the first place. I get adjusted because I want my brain at 100% for life. And that's a completely different conversation. It's not symptom-based care, it's lifestyle-based care. And this paradigm shift is what brings us into section 4, where you got to focus on your patient's journey. All right, so we've talked about PVA, we've talked about client experience, and we talked about reframing care. The next step in the journey is the client journey. I would look at this. Do I actually have a clearly mapped out patient journey? And more importantly, does my patient know what that journey is? Because here's one of the things that I find is that oftentimes people get stuck and confused in care because they don't know exactly where they're at in the process in the first place. Do they know what happens on day 1? Do they know what happens next week? Or do they know what's going to happen next month? Because as human beings, one of the things we crave is predictability. We want to know what is going to come next. And when you clearly communicate, here are the next steps, and you follow through on those things, that's what creates fulfillment. So here's the big hack. Anytime you tell someone something, remember to just tell them the next steps are. And this tiny phrase I've watched transform people's practices. And this is how I was sharing with you earlier. The client went from 12 PVA to 20 PVA just by adding the simple phrase, here's where you are and the next steps are, fill in the blank. And this fulfillment is going to increase retention. Next up, your ICP or ideal client profile. The first place I would go on the marketing side, before I run ads, before I start posting, is to understand my ICP or ideal client profile. You need to understand how your people think, what they value, what they fear, how they make decisions, what their objections are, and most importantly, what problem you are actually solving for them. And here's one little tactical way to start to think about how your ICP thinks and how to bridge the gap between pain or symptom-based care and lifestyle-based care. So the first thing you have to understand is that every person has 3 levels of pain, which they're trying to deal with or overcome. Level 1 is going to be primary pain. These are the symptoms. This is the back pains, the headaches, the migraines, the skin issues, etc. The part where most chiropractors get called in, and quite frankly, most stop. But there's something underlying that pain that is going to be more compelling to the patient if you can get them to understand and think differently about how that primary pain is affecting them. And this leads us into the secondary pain. And this is what that symptom or the primary pain is interfering with. It could be sleep, it could be focus, it could be connection and relationships. And level 3 is tertiary pain. And this is where the biggest impact is going to be made. These are the deepest levels of pain. They're the human desires: power, control, freedom, identity. If you speak only to symptoms, people will leave when their symptoms go away. And that makes you no better than a glorified Advil. If you speak to identity and you can do it with authority, I promise you people will stay. From there, I would build some sort of simple lead magnet to actually get people interested in who you are and what you do and start to solve a problem for them before they ever step foot into your practice. Something that solves a problem in advance. That could be a quiz, it could be a playbook, or it could be some kind of guide. Email, text, content that will build trust over time. And if you get stuck here, one of the things I want to encourage you to do is go use AI as your biggest resource. Literally, ChatGPT can build this for you without you having to think at all. So if your excuse is that you don't have time or you don't know how to do it, that simply can't be an excuse anymore, because ChatGPT does, and all you need to do is ask. But here's the kicker. None of this works if it is not real. I have seen too many people try to use the lead magnets and try to use the primary, secondary, tertiary pain conversation without living it. If it's not real, if you're not living it, then none of this works. Here's the truth. Your most valuable asset, the most important currency that you have inside of your life is time. So I have a question. Why are you spending it chasing new people instead of serving the people who already said yes to you more deeply? When you increase retention, you reduce stress, you increase referrals, you create stability, and you get your life back. And there's nothing more fulfilling than having a practice serving people who I already love and they know and trust me well, and being filled up at the end of the day and being able to go home and spend time with my family and not stress about where the next new person in my practice is going to come from. So if I had to start over today, I would figure out my PVA, identify drop-off points, create better client experiences, map out the journey for my clients, understand my ICP, build one strong lead magnet, and install simple automation like some kind of AI that will just support you in the process so it doesn't tax all your time building new resources for your patients. The best practices in the world, they don't chase. They stay so clear, so valuable, and so aligned that people stay. If you want help building this into your practice, that's exactly the kind of thing that we do inside of the Kingdom Council. If you're interested in learning more, check out apply.profitablechironetwork.com, and we'll see you next week. Peace.